Welcome to Rauta's retrospective. Once again, we dive deep into the Finnish black metal history. This time, particular band in question is Horna, a band that has gotten quite a bit of history along the way of already over 30 years in the making. Not only being an old-time veteran and one of the oldest still active bands coming from Finland in the world of black metal, this is also one of the most active bands when it comes to releasing music in various formats, 7-inch, full albums and collaborations. All kind of things have happened during all these decades, and that means that there's more than 50, let that sink in, more than 50 releases by Horna so far. Obviously that includes more than 10 full albums throughout the years, but a lot of these bulk, so to say, is made of splits of various kinds, and of course even live albums are included, not to mention compilations and whatnot. Now, because of this vast amount of stuff, it took quite a bit of time to go through all of this, not to mention reading the lyrics for full albums. And while there was not exactly available of all the lyrics, I pretty much can now summarize them, not just, taking these notes from my memories of old past times, but very, very recent recaption. So I kind of had a little bit of time to putting them together and explaining them to you because, most of the Horna lyrics are indeed in Finnish, which means they are not so easy to explain to someone who is not fluent with Finnish. This we will go through in more detail in following minutes, but first we'll tackle music, and even before that, we're gonna touch the subject called being a sketchy band. Now, this is very, very important to me, not only because I want to be fair to all the bands in the world. Doesn't matter what kind of political take you might have or nothing whatsoever. For me, it's important to stay honest and true and truthful with these topics because I hate so much all this cancel culture bullshit that it annoys me when there are lots of false accusations. Now, my history with the Gemen band goes all the way back to 90s when I got to know the band members back in the days, including Werewolf or Nazgul, how it was called in the early days of Horna. Through him I got to meet Shatrock already in the late 90s, and as such got to know the band and even some of the other ex-members of the band back in the days. So I've seen them relatively closely, while not exactly the same city and all. And of course, because I've been reading those lyrics, and of course I know where these sketchy echoes, like I would call them, where it is based, I will explain them as we go along the music. Now, first of all, before we get into detail with the lyrics, I must say, there is nothing sketchy in the lyrics. That is hard to understand those who don't know Finnish, but I want to put it out because there are really sketchy bands. I mean, in terms of lyrics, there are lyrics which are either, racist or homophobic or just plain and simple neo-Nazi in nature. Some are more nationalistic, some are more that stuff. But when you read Horna lyrics, there's nothing of that. The band has said itself, and if you go read the lyrics, it's really, really fucking far-fetched to blame it on all that stuff. I'm not defending the band because I don't have any personal bias in the band, even if I know some of the guys. I mean, if there were the real culprits, I would say it right here, loud and clear. But because there is none, I find it's very, very unfair to blame a lot of this bullshit on Horna while they have nothing in the lyrics and all that stuff. I don't comment any particular interviews, so if you have certain statements from there, well, it's up to you to interpret how you will. But let's just make it clear, there are sketchy bands, and then there are bands which might seem sketchy to some less acquainted, less, learned eyes and ears, and Horna isn't really one of them. Now, that being said, I'm going to say something that some people are not going to appreciate, but it's once again, these truthful moments which I just have to share you. It's no secret, not at all, that I'm not really a Horna fan when it comes to the music. That's not because the band is bad, because in my opinion it's not. Obviously it's better band than many out there, but most of the Horna albums have not really resonated with me with that much. And obviously when I was going through the whole discography here, I was kind of waiting for those moments when like, hey man, how come I have missed a lot of these good albums? Yes, I had missed some, but mostly it kind of confirmed what I already knew about the band based on a lot of releases I've gone through the years. And I still say, for me, Horna is definitely more a live band because their live is intense. The guys know their instruments and songs, and the whole black metal feeling is right there. Nothing but respect as Horna in general, and really, like I said, they are a really good live band, and in my opinion, one of the torch-bearing black metal bands from Finland. But when it comes to albums, I must say I only am a fan of a few individual Horna albums rather than the whole discography, and then there are a few ones which I would call outright average releases, which are not really even decent ones. They're just kind of a more forgettable one. But this is kind of a stuff that is bound to happen when you have lots and lots, and in their case it's more than 50 releases. Not everything just can't be good. So, because probably people are gonna compare bands like I recently did the Sargai's discography run, the whole retrospective and thing. People are gonna compare these bands together because certain same members are or have been in the band and still are. And obviously some certain echoes might be, resonating through the style and all. But let me make it clear, these two bands are different despite a lot of same history with, the similar lineups and all. And even nowadays, Sargeist and Horna are closer to one another because more than one member is the same. Okay, enough of this early intro and disclaimer. We're already in a few minutes and it's time to start talking about the given band here. So, Horna was founded early on in the 90s, 1993 to be precise, even though under different moniker in Lappeenranta, which is more like southern eastern part of Finland, closer to Russia than Sweden, unlike we on the west coast of Finland. And as such, Lappeenranta quickly became a hub of its own for a lot of black metal acts. Obviously, bands like Satanic Warmaster is from Lappeenranta as well because they share the history with Horna and a bunch of other bands. So Lappeenranta is one of those smaller hubs in Finland when it comes to black metal. Very much a key city in a way to the 1990s of Finnish black metal. Other parts would be bands like cities like Rovaniemi for Beheri or Oulu for Impel Nazarene and other bands. There are lots of bands from northern parts of Finland, but Lappeenranta became one of the hubs not only because of Horna, but mainly because of Horna, and then there have been quite a few of other bands. So the important part. Later on, Horna relocated to Tampere region, which is one of the biggest metal cities in Finland altogether when it comes to gigs and bands and all that stuff. So kind of two hubs dominated by Horna. And Horna has, ever since they got started more than 30 years ago, been a very, very active band. So let's try to go through of all that stuff. Let's start with the name. Horna is a very, very beautiful word, in my opinion, in Finnish, because first of all, it's very, short and sweet. And at the same time, it is a perfect name for a black metal band. Like you said, it's kind of means abyss or hell. And that's pretty much how you can say. In a way, Horna is not like biblical hell, but more like the abyss, So, great name. And this logo they have been using, in my opinion, it's a very, very good Christopher Spagel logo, which is known as the master of the logos. It has these double goats, obviously 2 inverted crosses with number 666 mentioned on both stuff. Then there's this 5-pointed star. There are these wings or things that resemble wings. And in general, in my opinion, a beautiful logo, which is like a very, very classical, old school black metal logo for so many ways. And it really has, marked its thing in the history. So whatever started in early on by Horna was like bands used to do back in the days, taking their time to do demos and all that stuff. So they had Varjoissa, literally in shadows. This is a very, very kind of a clumsy demo in a ways and rather typical take back in the days. Mediocre release in nowadays standards in so many ways. Harsh sound and, songwriting wasn't that good. They really stepped up only in a couple of years when they made Hiiden Torni. You could translate it to Tower of the Goblin or whatever. And that is a big step up. Now, after that came Kohti 9 Nousua, their key album in a way, because that really made or put Horna on the map in 1998. And obviously this name, Kotiksena, towards the rise of nine or whatever, is a reference to Tolkien and those 9 Nazguls. And all these lyrics basically are referring to both anti-Christianity as well as Tolkien themes. So back in the days, these themes were like one another, side by side. And for example, Erkki Vuorilta from the Orc Mountains, the lyrics are already like, you're like, kill all the Christians, and at the same time, it's also about like, coming from the Orc Mountains. There are also topics in early lyrics, like when they're like riding the wolves, like certain goblins or whatever. So these overlapping fantasy themes, with the anti-Christianity is very, very much something that I can, totally relate with back in the 90s. Now, I always wanted to keep my personal role-playing and video game habits apart from black metal, but I come from a similar background. Role-playing games, fantasy movies, fantasy books, what have you, as well as my hatred for religions and Christianity in particular. This was a very, very common things already, like back in the early 90s when it was defining me. So when I found there are lots of other peoples, including Nazgul and Shatrau, who were thinking the same, or even other old members from Horna, which some of them later on went to found Battle Lore, a band that is also about Tolkien themes and all. So it made sense. Suddenly we didn't even know one another back in the early 90s, but a lot of people were thinking the same, even in Norway, so, or Austria for that matter, thinking of summoning. So these themes of fantasy literature and movies and games and all that stuff were suddenly hand in hand with topics like anti-Christianity, and that was very much how Horna was defined. And in my opinion, Erkki Vuorilta is one of their best songs still to this day, because it's so catchy. The lyrics don't make much of a sense, especially if you're not a teenager anymore, but as a song, it's a really, really good one. And for me, this first album is kind of divided because the early parts are really good, then towards the end, not so much, especially when the later songs are not that good. But mind you, here you have some English included in Horna lyrics, which were later abandoned when the band moved on and they kind of made their name and style more defined, as say. So a new album, only 1 year later, 100 kilometer mile, which you could translate in the lands of grave coldness, roughly, came this album, and suddenly it's all Finnish. Here they are clearly against Christianity, like kristityn kuolema, the death of Christian, or kun Jumalan sydän on murskattu, when the heart of God is crushed, or viimeinen sielu Jumalan valosta, the last soul from the light of God, and all that stuff. So, or also kunnia saatanalle, glory to Satan. All these topics are now here more, evident. The anti-Christian, that is anti-God, anti-Jesus, everything. So classic already first or second wave black metal is very, very dominating here. And suddenly the English themes are gone. And the Tolkien stuff started fading quite early. But if I remember correctly, these lyrics, I think the first 2 albums pretty much had Tolkien and anti-Christianity. Maybe 1/3 was more like Tolkien stuff, and then more anti-Christianity. Then started this era when there were like splits and EPs after one another. There was Sota, War EP already 1999, and then some split, Perimä vihassa and Verkostossa, Whispered Myths, and that was again released again. Then Horna, Mustasurma, another classic old Finnish black metal band, doing split with them. And already 2001. So only 2 years after that, but after a couple of EPs and split, gave Suden Taival, the path of a wolf, if you want to translate it roughly. So once again, mostly in Finland, but suddenly there's a song called Black Metal Sodomy. And some of these lyrics are almost like translations from, Norwegian things, like kun synkkä ikuisuus avautuu is roughly the same as eternity opens, immortal, right? So this is just as dark eternity opens. See the similarities. Now, back in the days, already like late 90s and early 2000s, roughly that era, Horna was a little bit, not blamed, but accused a little bit, like, hey, you're taking the riffs literally from Norwegian bands like Dødheimskar or whatever. And so as such, they kind of almost like localized the Norwegian and Swedish black metal into Finnish territory. Not only with lyrics, but certain riffs were like, hey, this is almost like not copying, but literally taking. Much like later on, there were lots of bands who were like doing the Burzum copycat thing. So Horna definitely had a lot of that mother's milk coming from Norway in terms of music, and that you can literally hear. When I say literally, I mean when you listen to that and compare to a lot of Norwegian stuff from the 90s, it's very, very evident there. But then again, you can't really bitch about it when you copy from the best, so understandable. Now, if the split and EP thing started already in the 90s, like coming with full force. After 2001, it became even more evidently. Suddenly there was Musta Surma Horna split, Korpin Hetki EP, Risti ja Ruoska. I'm not going to translate all of these, but if you want to, I can translate with the comments later on. But Korpin Hetki, The Hour of the Raven, Risti ja Ruoska, Cross and Whip and so on. And then more splits would follow, then another EP, another split, which is one of the curious ones, and, compilations putting some stuff here from the early on in one and same thing. Then more EP split with Beheksen, another good Finnish black metal band, which is the moment they had already, started doing Sargeist together with the Beheksen guys around 1999. So by this time, it was 5 years later, but these bands were like, a tie. And these things with splits and EPs kept going. In 2005, however, they released what is, in my opinion, the best Horna album so far. I'm gonna just call it Evangels of Satan, which really is just in a different ways. Now, talking about this is interesting because basically Horna could be, put into 3 different eras. Like a lot of bands have different eras during the years. I would say Enslaved has at least 4 eras by now. Dark Throne, probably 4 or even 5. Burzum, at least 3 different eras. So Horna is no different. But how they are, put into different eras is mostly, in my opinion, because of lineup. Now, this is a good way to jump off a little bit from the discography side and take a look at the current lineup. Current lineup has only Shadrach of early days of Horna, since he was the founder of the band. Infection has been with the band since 2002, main guitarist with the band after Shadrach. But the other members, Spellgoth, as late as 2009, meaning the band had been there more than 15 years already, so halfway through. Nowadays, of course, you can consider him a veteran member of the band, being there for more than 15 years, but back in the days, he was the new guy. And Age, the brother of Spellgoth, joined 2016, and later on Venom 2018. Nowadays, everybody is an old veteran of the band, but like I said, what seems nowadays like an old thing was back in the days obviously a new thing. Now, past member list is quite a vast, not exactly Baratrum vast, but still. You had Gorthauer for drums for a few early years, then Moredhel, who went to Battlelore, was guitarist in the early years for a bit and bass. Nazgul, of course, the first era of Horna, was known as the original vocalist. He's not, but technically speaking, when we're talking about albums and all that stuff, after demo phase, Nazgul was the voice that made Horna so known. Only 5 years, which seems a very, very short time in hindsight, but because he was the first eras, when I got to know the guys and all, obviously he is the vocalist for a lot of old schoolers. Then you had a lot of other members which come and go, and that's the different story. There are lots of band members which you see going through different bands here. So all of them are more or less veterans in a scene, and lots of people have other bands which they're mostly known for. Like Southern is mostly known for his main band, Total Self-Hatred, and his ex-work with Gorkondrus. Obviously, Corvus, the second vocalist, is mostly known for his work in Gorkondrus, but also Total Self-Hatred, and he was the second era vocalist for Horna, which lasted for around 7 years, the very active years, mind you. And then you, of course, had Vainaja and Hexin Fairy for a few years, making their keyprint in a way. But technically speaking, we could say Horna is divided into 3 different eras by the vocalists, because Shadrach and Infection have been in the band for so a long time. So you had the Nazgul phase, which then again springed off to Satanic Warmaster and the like. Then you had the Corvus era, which took a big part of the whole chunk, and then he went on with Gorkondrus, and of course then you have Spellgoth era, which is more than half of the band's overall era. And this is, of course, reflected how the vocals have been performed. So early years when Nazgul were there, they were more screamy, high-pitchy thing. Some even go for as far as to call them Donald Duck vocals. This is something I heard from a Norwegian guy. Maybe they're reflecting that, with the bands like, say, Saturican, Darkthrone, whatever, more raspy style, Gorgoroth even. But then again, if you compare that to old, say, Emperor style, suddenly it's not that different. Same thing with, the Behexen style, more shrieky, high-pitchy one. Now, with Corvus style, vocals changed a lot raw, and he is known as one of the best black metal vocalists in Finland. His sound is so much more raspy and aggressive and, in general, just harsh. And in my opinion, he's my favorite Horna vocalist, and I totally understand when people say that, because I agree with that. Now, he was in big part from 2002 or 2009 or so. So a lot of these splits, the early years, when the splits and, EPs were dominating whole Horna stuff. I mean, take a look at here. Early on, the albums came pretty much back to back. Suddenly, there was a bigger gap between, the fourth album and third album, and after that, the albums came quite quickly, but these years from 2001 to 2005, they're mostly dotted with different EPs and splits. So these were where Corvus was dominating the scene here, and maybe it's just a coincidence, but Evangels of Satan is, for me, it's the most catchy Horna album. It has the momentum going on, it has a certain rawness, and also those vocals, but in general, just the best songs. However, Ääniä yössä, Voices in the Night, and Sotahuuto, War Cry, they changed. Ääniä yössä is basically, continuing whatever Evangels did, but it's not just, in my opinion, not even close how good album Evangels is. Sotahuuto, however, is a weird one, because it doesn't really fit the Horna bill at all. But here it says it's tribute to Bathory, and as such, maybe it's one of my favorite Horna albums, because all these songs are almost like tribute to 80s black metal. So it's almost like a side adventure, if you will. It doesn't really have much to do with the rest of Horna discography, because it's just so different, really. The songs are kind of just black and thrash in a way. The same thing that early first three Bathory albums are. And while not as good as Bathory in songwriting, I mean, Sotahuuto has definitely some of the best material Horna ever written. So it's kind of a shame that they didn't keep going. But like I said, it's a tribute, one thing pony in a way, and then it moved on back to what Horna is mostly known for, which is Sanojesi äärelle. And this more like kept going on what Ääniä yössä had been going. So suddenly less EPs and no more focus on the albums. However, still splits and EPs and whatever before, going on with the different albums. So then the vocalists were changed eventually, and there was an album called Askel lähempänä Saatanaa, which, if I remember correctly, is the first Spellgoth album. Now, I'm not sure, because it's sometimes hard to remember all the lineup individually, and I don't know, Metal Archives tends to have this loading problem, so let's get it through. Anyway, for me, whoever was the vocalist, I think it was Spellgoth, is probably the most boring Horna album. Suddenly the songwriting wasn't good. It was just like a lukewarm thing. I don't know what happened. Did it run out of fuel? Because there was this moment when things were really, really strong albums, like Evangels here, Sotahuuto here, 2005, 2007 respectively. And it's not like these two albums from 2006 and 2009 were bad, but I mean, they were not as good as the other ones. But here, 2013, and suddenly the album wasn't that good. Yeah, this is a Spellgoth album. And so unfortunately, he had to start with what I consider the weakest Horna full album. However, things were picking up with Hengen Tulet only 2 years later, which is, in my opinion, clearly stronger albums. However, what is curious, in my opinion, is that Kasteessa Kirottu, already getting better, and this is old stuff. That's why this was released on the smaller label instead of World Terror Committee, and here it said it's like old songs, even though later recorded. And this is actually one of the best Horna albums. I didn't expect me to like it so much, and this was something that I missed back in the days, maybe because it was on a smaller label and all. But yeah, it's one of the best ones. And these two latest ones by Spellgod and the people, Kuolemakirjo Spectrum of Death, and Nyx Hymnia Yölle, Hymns to the Night, 2024 and 2020, these are some of the best Horna albums also. So it seems like Horna has really stepped up. And I would go even back to explain this. In terms of production, obviously, demo, very harsh, homemade, blah, blah, blah. And that was pretty much the raw end of things going on in the early 90s. Oh, sorry, late 90s, the early albums. And that kept kind of going throughout the 2000s. Even if the band was getting bigger and you would imagine budget and the level of knowledge and all that would get, better over the years, Horna kind of stuck to this rather unpolished and raw end of sound, but not exactly as strong as, say, what Darkthrone did with their really raw black metal sound and when their golden era. It was almost like Horna got stuck, with the shorter straw. Raw, but not as violent, that's not as strong, despite of being kind of harsh and all. So later on, when the band has putting out maybe more melodic stuff and more clean vocals, mind you, this is important to mention, Kuolemakirjo and Nyx has more clean vocals than Horna ever before. And while it is obviously dividing people into different camps, whether you like clean vocals or not is one thing, but here suddenly they are picking up the pace with, so much better production, and it fits, in my opinion. Nyx probably has the best production for Horna album of all times, and it makes a lot of sense because it really supports a more melodic and more atmospheric output, especially when you consider the clean vocals and all. So something kind of started changing here with the 2020 album, Kuolemakirjo. It's not as strong in terms of production than Nyx, but it's clearly a momentum shift from the earlier albums, not too many years before that. So while Horna has been always, in terms of songwriting, kind of the same. It's not like there's no big gaps, big differences, except for the Sotahuuto album, which is the Battery tribute. It has always maintained this somewhat fast tempo, not blast beating. We're not talking about the Marduk's and the Dark Funerals on the fastest. But it's always been this somewhat semi-raw black metal band with certain kind of grooviness, certain kind of memorability, but not exactly, so much defining the Finnish black metal sound later on, like what, for example, with, I think, Satanic Warmaster, and in a way also Sargeist did. Horna is definitely having the Finnish black metal sound to it, but somehow it's more vague than what I would say Satanic Warmaster and Sargeist, not to mention Beheksen, made to its sound. But Horna has been this most hardworking band in tours and albums, so even if their sound is not so trademark-like, at least they have always sounded very true, very honest themselves and not changed their style so much. The only difference I would say is later on more clean vocals, which is then again makes kind of a more sense because nowadays they have at least 3 vocalists. Shadrach obviously did vocals himself back in the days and still does now with Sargeist. Spellgod being a long-time vocalist for other bands before Horna even, Turmion Kätilöt and his other bands before that, or along these years. And of course Infection, he used to be the death metal vocalist for Sota Jumala before joining Horna. So there are at least 3 vocals. I don't know about the other guys, how much they do vocals, but it makes sense they're taking the benefit of having multi-talents in the band. And that's one of the beauties in the band, because all the guys in the bands are veterans. You have more than one guy able to play drums, more than one guy or more than 2 guys playing bass, guitars, whatever, or drums. So it's almost like they can shift places, technically speaking. However, Shadrach remains captain of the ship and basically everybody else is replaceable. I don't mean they should be doing that, but as the history has shown, everybody else can be replaced in the band except Shadrach. Now, talking about the sketchiness then, this is easily tracked to a couple of releases back in the days. And this is as far as sketchy they go, which means, in my books, not at all. I mean, you can always go guilty by association, guilty by friends and all, but like I said, there is nothing sketchy in their lyrics. It's all just about early on Tolkien and anti-Christianity, later on about anti-Christianity and Jesus dies, God dies, they're suffering, whatever. So whatever is listed here as Satanism, paganism, occultism, evil, darkness, well, paganism maybe not so much, but all these themes, spells or ancient writings or violence against Christianity, yeah, the standard black metal thing, both in good and bad. In my books, more good than bad, but that's what I'm saying here. But if we're talking about the so-called sketchy things, because that's not in the lyrics, and obviously riffs can't be sketchy, drum fills can't be sketchy. So what is the sketchy thing people keep bringing up about Horna, why certain people want to, cancel it? Basically, it's a couple of split releases which make them certain kind of a culprits in some people's eyes. Mostly, I guess, it would be the split between Peste Noire and Horna, because Peste Noire is often boxed as some kind of a nationalistic band or even NSBM band for a certain degree because of the French socialism. Now, how much French socialism or French nationalism has to do with Horna goes beyond me. As far as I'm concerned, they might be friends, but how do some French nationalism, stick to a Finnish band? Goes beyond me. It's really kind of a far-fetched. There are also some other bands along these splits which people say it's sketchy because they did, split with this and that band. I think it was this Legion of Doom thing, which was also sketching this because they have certain things like Hellenic antiquity, which means you can pretty much go a couple of steps away from nationality and anti-Semitism. So more like because of this Greek band has racist or maybe nationalistic things, it's somehow labeling Horna as well. I don't know how that is possible, but that just alone tells you how far-fetched these accusations are. So Horna has more than 50 releases, and only maybe a couple of them are seen sketchy because the split bands are sketchy. That's almost like once upon a time, say you were a teenager, you might run an essay and said like, I don't like immigration or whatever, and people are like, oh, problematic person right there. And then you're like, hey, man, I'm 30 years older than now. I wouldn't even write this kind of essay. But you did a couple of nasty words back in the days. You must be a culprit. You must go to prison. Okay, whatever. So I'm saying like these kind of accusations are fucking stupid. I mean, I kind of wanted to give the benefit of doubt both ways. I mean, bring out the proof if you have any. But if the only proof is that they made a couple of splits with bands that might be seen sketchy, yeah, we're fucked in the whole black metal community. Anyway, so talking about summarizing the whole career discography-wise so far is that about 12 albums so far, which are mostly on the decent side of things and a couple of really good ones. Like I would say my top 3 would be roughly Nyx, because it's just most polished black metal album by Horna ever, and I don't mean in a negative way. It's not like overly polished or anything like that. I would say Sotahuuto because it's a good Bathory tribute, and like I said, my favorite, Evangels. So they're quite scattered. One from 2005, one from 2007, and suddenly one from 2024. And the runner-up would be Kuolemakirjat from year 2020. Actually, Kuolemakirjo and Sotahuuto are pretty much like, the same level. Nyx is a little bit better than those two. And let's not forget this Kastes Kirjoitu, which is compiled of old songs. Definitely, that would be the roughly top 5 release for me. When it comes to splits, in case you're new to Horna and you want to figure out whether they're either worth collecting, and the answer is yes, if you're a fan. If you're a casual listener or just going for the good stuff, you can mostly skip the EPs. For me, on average, these EPs are less good than the albums. There are a couple of exceptions to that, like say, for example, Horna Beheksen split is one of the better ones, but that is, in my opinion, partially because Beheksen side is better. Maybe Musta Surma Horna splits are something that could be considered some of the better ones, but once again, that's partially because of Musta Surma. Then there are a couple of these splits where Horna is definitely the better one, and the other bands, not so much. Some would say some of the best ones are here, like Talismani and Vuohipainen. Relatively strong EPs, but I wouldn't still compare to the best albums by Horna. So if you ask me, Horna is best as a live band, secondarily best with the given albums. So now that I mentioned my top 5 albums and my least favorite album by Horna, Askel lähempänä saatana, what is the overall recap of Horna career? Well, at best, Horna is better than Sargeist, where Shadrach is also, writing songs and all. But on average, I would say Sargeist is a little bit better, just for me. But as a live band, in my opinion, Horna does better than on albums. It's definitely one of those cornerstones in the Finnish black metal territory, with bands like, Beherit, Archgoat, and Imbel Nazarene, where those three are the most, the oldest ones, and as such, more important than anything else from, Finnish black metal scene. Horna is still the most active. I mean, Horna has more releases altogether than, say, Beherit and Archgoat combined. Imbel Nazarene has so many albums that if you put all these three bands against Horna, oh well, the trio might then win. Baratrum is challenging Horna in terms of amount of albums out there, but Horna has more EPs and all that stuff. So kind of a given if you had to give the gold medal for most active Finnish black metal band that never went out of the black metal box. Well, yeah, they totally deserve the gold medal for that. So definitely, maybe the most valuable, most resourceful black metal band of all times from Finland. Maybe not so much classic albums like than Beherit or Imbel Nazarene for that matter, but I mean, they still have probably more than any other band put Finland, in the world of black metal map. So they definitely deserve all the success and all the praising and all that stuff, even if I'm not the biggest fan of the band out there. When it comes to the members, however, I think they're all great guys. So even if I'm not a big fan of the music, I'm kind of a fan of these guys because all these guys here, not the nowadays lineup, they are all good. Shadraug, Infection, Spellgoth, Lauri, and Venom. They're all good guys, and I can really say, nasty things about them because I consider all of them friends and all decent guys, good musicians. I can only assume probably good band members too because they have stuck up with, one another for so many years. So this is my love letter in a way to Horna, my thank you to Horna for putting a black metal on the Finnish map and all that stuff. Now, whether you're gonna do the whole discography run or focus only on the albums, I think it's, worth taking your time to. Now, when it comes to listening to this stuff, it's quite scattered. Only some stuff is on Bandcamp, only some stuff is on Spotify and other streaming services, and some stuff is only available on YouTube. Maybe even not that. There was like one EP which I couldn't find even on YouTube. But if you search enough, you will most likely get that stuff. And obviously, if you're a real fan, you will buy a lot of this stuff. I already have my Horna favorites in my collection, so there is that. But if you want to just listen to the band and maybe find more favorites or other stuff, yeah, give it a go. Horna has totally deserved it. And to finalize this, or finish this whole retrospective video, obviously there's a link to old Horna interview a few years ago, and I will link it to this end of this whole video there. So in case I got you interested, check it out. And of course, when you have the possibility, go to see Horna live. It's a good, solid black metal band to cater to your needs. That's all you need to know for now. Should you have comments or questions, let me know and I'll pass the questions to the band if I can't answer them myself. Thank you so much.